Yeah, so I write songs for a living. I make records. If you all remember what a record player is, yeah? Yeah. CDs, tapes. I don't do tapes. I should do tapes, but I don't do tapes. But the thing I love about music, and looking back, it's funny, like coming down here, I kind of, whenever I come to Tassie, and I come here a few times a year, but I get very, I don't know if emotional is the right word, but I get very introspective because my dad's family is from here. And I shared last night, I've been deep diving on Ancestry.com, and I found, back to the 1820s, like some of the original OG convicts going back on Dad's side. And there's heaps of them still here. And, I came here a lot with my father before he passed away. And so it always makes me think about, family and connection. And I think the thing that I love about all of that, it reminds me a lot of my dad. And he was one of those guys, he was just good at bringing people together. And I think that's what music does, it brings people together. It's a bit like football. I love AFL-Footy. Any AFL fans here? Anyone love it? Some, not really. I'm loving it a bit less. I'm trying to love it less because Geelong don't look like they're going that well this year. And my mate actually is quite funny. I've got a very good mate and he's a lawyer and his son's now 25 and joined the family business as a lawyer. And his son took him aside. He said, "Dad," because my friend and I go to the football whenever we can, and when we can't go, we text each other right throughout the games. And he said to me, he reckons his son took him aside and said, "Dad, I'm very concerned about how you let the actions of a bunch of young adolescent men dictate your mood for a week." And it really made me think. So I'm trying to love it less. But I love it because it brings people together. And the thing about music is that I think if we're honest, artists, bands, musicians have probably made more change for people's lives in the last 50 years than any politician, especially the good ones. And, on a much smaller level, I think I get to do that. I sing and speak in a lot of schools around the country every year, or not just around Australia, around countries like England and around Asia, and I get to use music as this thing that connects, but then from there, educate people. So the thing about that song that I just sang then, Solid Rock, I didn't write that song, obviously. That song was written by Shane Howard in 1982. This is cutting in and out, this mic. I might switch it for this one. That song was written in 1982 by Shane Howard. How many of you guys remember when that first song came out? Back in 1982, yeah? Have you ever thought... it's interesting, oh, there we go. Look at that, it's a flash one. Thank you. When I recorded a version of that song in 2016, and Shane Howard was kind enough to sing on that with me on my record, and it was a life-changing thing because that took the song to a massive audience, got played on the radio all over Australia and got me a record deal and all kinds of things. And I remember sitting with Shane just saying to him, it's crazy to me that in 1982 when Australia was not anywhere near as inclusive as it is today, that song even got played on the... Have you ever listened to the words of that song? Like the last verse still haunts me, the lyric in that verse. They were standing on the shore one day. It wasn't long before they felt the sting. And you think, gee, how did radio in 1982 even play that? I had a song last year that they wouldn't play because it was deemed to be too controversial racially. But, they played it, and they played it a lot. And that song really did educate a lot of Aussies and continues to, and it's a real gift. I love it because my family's Aboriginal. My mum's family's Aboriginal, so my dad's family are Scottish convicts who have been on the island here since the 1820s. Mum's family's Aboriginal from Yorta country, which is Shepparton, Echuca. And I shared last night, one of the things that I learned early on is that, and it's funny, I ask this question to teenagers every day I'm in schools, and I do it just as much as anything to entertain myself. But I'll say to teenagers, what percentage of adults that you know in your world go to work every day? They don't necessarily hate it, but they don't love it. They're like, oh, I've got to go to work. And I'm not even joking, teenagers every day are like, it's between 70 and 90%. And they're perceptive. So teenagers all over this country are seeing adults drag themselves to work every day just being miserable. And I realised early on that life is all about currency. Now, a lot of people, when they think about currency, they think it's about money. But money's real fleeting. Spend it, keep it, gamble it, give it away, lose it, find it. For some people, the currency that drives them the hardest is their possessions. Got the flash house, the flash car. But you have a car accident, you get an insurance check, you'll buy an even nicer car. There's only one currency that any of us can't budget and we can't replace, and that's time, And we don't even know how much we've got. I look at Paul, and he's 93 years old. Sorry, Paul, to do that to you. But what a gift, We buried one of my very best mates last year on his 47th birthday, and he left behind 4 sons. I'll never complain about getting old. What a gift. It's the only one true currency we have. And I don't reckon that God intended for us to spend that one true currency dragging ourselves around being miserable. So I figured out early, life is all about figuring out, what did God give you? Like, what are your talents? What are your natural giftings? And what are you passionate about? And can you put those two things together and find someone to give you money to do that thing, right? Hopefully Stephen's figured that out. Geez, they're in trouble if you haven't. And so for me, I figured out early, well, I'm good at music. I've been playing music since 5 years old. My parents were Salvation Army. And so I remember being 5, walking into church every Sunday morning and seeing the brass band, And I remember saying to my mum, you've got to get me a trombone. Because I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And my mum was like, listen, mate, your arm's that long. So they gave me a cornet. Do you all know what a cornet is? Yeah. And I could just play it. I'd watched people play it my whole life. I'd studied that band. I was just focused and hyper-fixated. And by the time I was 7 years old, I was playing in a brass band with fully grown adults. Played guitar from grade 4, joined choirs. I was born and God said, mate, you can play music. I can't explain it, but I'm grateful for it. I'm passionate about Aboriginal people. I really am, and I'm passionate about this country. And so I've endeavoured for the last 20 years to bring those things together and use it to try to make a difference. So I've come up with a slogan, if you want. It's probably not the right word, but I've got a saying that I'm really passionate about. I reckon education leads to understanding. Understanding leads to empathy, and empathy is what brings change, right? So today I'm going to hopefully educate you a little bit, and I'm hoping that will inspire you to be more understanding, although you probably already all are, because this is like a wonderful church. And from that understanding, we're going to have some more empathy that gets developed. Now, there's so many things that I would love to share with you, but time would prohibit a lot of it. Usually the sessions I do in a school or corporate, I do a lot of corporate speaking as well, I will go for probably 100 minutes. And we don't have that time this morning, so you're going to get a condensed. There's people saying, no, I've got a roast on, hurry. So we'll get to it. I'm going to get to it with a statement. I reckon if you live in this country, you are no less Australian than I am as an Aboriginal man. Now I want to repeat that. If you live here and you call this place home, in your heart, if this is your home, you are no less Australian than I am as an Aboriginal man, regardless of your skin colour, regardless of where you were born, regardless of what your passport says. I believe that because I think, Australia is the greatest country ever. Now, I'm not saying it's the greatest country ever because I'm some dumb bogan who's like, Australia. I'm saying it because I grew up in Hong Kong for 6 years as a missionary's kid. All my primary school years I lived in Hong Kong. I got married and my wife and I spent 2 years living in America. Since then, I've travelled to 39... in my lifetime, I've travelled to 39 countries. I've spent a lot of time overseas. And I reckon this is the best country on the planet. Now, you know what I think makes it the best country on the planet? It's not perfect, there's a lot of issues, but do you know what I think makes it the best country? Is that we've always welcomed anyone that ever came here, more than any other country. I mean, you think about it. My Aboriginal ancestors, for thousands of years, they were in partnership with the land. They were one. There was no extinct species. Aboriginal men are the first humans we know of that used fire to regenerate the land. Like, total harmony. We were welcomed by Mother Earth. I was thinking about the convicts a lot because of, I've been doing the deep dive. And is there anyone else who's got convict relatives? Hectic stories, right? Do you know the actual stories of your family? Yeah. My relatives, I found out they got transported here for stealing gooseberries. They were 15 and 14. 15 and 14, and they spent 18 months in a floating prison on the Thames River, and then they came here. Now, I've been and visited Richmond Jail. That is hectic. I don't mean to sound too dramatic, but I could feel the blood in the soil on that place. Their jail time would have been exceptionally difficult for teenage boys. But here's the thing about Australia. They finished their sentence. I mean, the English would have looked at them and hated them. They were Scottish. They were teenagers and they were thieves. Think about it, right? The English would have looked at those boys and thought that they were less than human. But they get to Australia, they do their jail sentence, and at the end of it, Australia goes to my relatives, you might be nothing in England. You might be scum there. You might be less than you, but you can be something here. Would you like to start again? And 6 generations later, I've got the greatest life ever because this country welcomed my family. Now, I live in Melbourne, which I know I'm biased, but it's the greatest city in the world. Shut up. It is. But they don't have Luminous Festival there, so it's not that good. Did you guys know that there's more Greek people living in Melbourne than any city in the world except for Athens? Did you know that? That blows my mind. Athens, number 1 city for Greek people, obviously. Melbourne, number 2 city. Now, there's a lot of Italians as well. Do you know why there's so many Greeks and Italians in Melbourne? Do you guys know why? Because at the end of World War II, all these people had nowhere to call home. And a bit like Ukraine and Palestine at the moment, sadly. And Australia turned around and said, you fellas, you want to come and be Aussies? Come and be Aussies. Just bring some souvlaki's and some pizzas. Thank God they did. In the 70s and 80s, we had all these people from Cambodia and Vietnam escaping war. You had Chinese people escaping communism. You had African people escaping famine. Every group of people that's come to this country has brought stuff that's made Australia better. Right. Now, last year when I joined you guys, it was the very start. It was the first week of a 4-month tour. I was literally on the road for 4 months. I bought a Ford Transit and a trailer, and we drove. We left here and we drove straight to Albury, and then we went from Albury to Uluru. We drove from Uluru to Darwin. We drove from Darwin to Broome. I spent 7 weeks driving down the coast of West Australia, across the Nullarbor, Adelaide, up to Cairns and down the east coast. It was amazing. It was hard though, very, very, very hard. When I got home, my wife said to me the first weekend I was home, she goes, what do you want to do for your first weekend off? I said, let's do my favourite activity. Let's go have food. Because Melbourne, how good, you guys been to Melbourne, right? You know how good the eating is there. And so she said, what do you want to have for breakfast? I said, well, I grew up in Hong Kong, let's have some yum cha. You know the Chinese where they bring the trolley full of dumplings and they keep bringing more trolleys and more dumplings, and you think you're going to vom, but you push through? We dominated that. Then lunchtime, we had some pizza. Now, how many of you guys have been to Lygon Street? Lygon Street, famous worldwide for Italian food. I remember going for my 5th birthday to a restaurant called Papagino's. It's in Lygon Street. It has been there since the 60s. Gino started. His 3 sons are now in their 60s and they still run it. And I'm not even joking. I'm a fiend for pizza. I'm thinking about doing an Instagram page for pizza reviews. Love it. Best pizza I've ever had anywhere in the world. Naples, Italy. We were at a restaurant on the beach, my family and I, my kids, my wife. The sun was setting and we had this cheese pizza. I feel like Jesus probably made that pizza. It was a spiritual experience. The second best pizza I've had in the world was in Lygon Street at Papagino's. Amazing. We had that for lunch. Dinner, we had some curry. Amazing Indian curry, love a curry. And then at 1 a.m, I couldn't sleep, but Uber Eats brought me a Turkish kebab, so it was okay. Went all over the world in 14 hours. How good's Australia, you know? And you had last night, I didn't get to it, but you had your big food festival down just out in this foyer here. How good is this country? I love this country. Best country ever. Not everyone sees it that way. I shared this story last night, and forgive me if you were here last night, but you're going to hear this story again. I was in Mildura, and I had an encounter with an older gentleman who was with his wife having lunch. We were at a cafe outside. And 2 tables across from them, and they were probably in their 70s, and 2 tables across from there was 2 teenage boys, and they were probably 14 or 15, and I reckon they were from India or from Sri Lanka, their families. Anyway, the husband starts complaining to his wife about the teenagers, and he talks about their skin colour, and he uses the N-word. And then he says to his wife with such pride and venom in his voice, he says, listen to their accents. They're not even real Australians. My family are real Australians. We've been here 6 generations. And he was so proud of himself. And at that point, I turned around and I interrupted him and said, excuse me, mate, you're not a real Australian. You're actually a half-wit. Might have used a slightly stronger word than that. I said, and I'm going to say to you what I said to him. Unless your mum and dad are 100% Aboriginal in your bloodline, you're a boat person. Unless you are 100% Aboriginal in your bloodline, you're a refugee. The only thing that separates any of us in this room is time. And the arrogance and the stupidity of some dumb bogan, oh, you've been here 6 generations, you've been here 3, get stuffed. If you live here and you call this country home, you are no less Australian than I am as an Aboriginal man. That is what makes this the greatest country on the planet, in my opinion. Does that make sense? Can we agree? Thank you. Can we agree that we're all equally Australian? Is that a fair statement? All right. If we're all equally Australian, we need to understand something. A lot of us got taught that Captain Cook discovered this country. You heard that before? Yeah. The problem with that lie is that A, it's a lie. My ancestors were here for thousands of years. Also, I don't know if you know this, but the Chinese got here before him. The Dutch got here before him. He didn't discover anything, he rocked up. The problem with that comment though, with that statement, is that there's a whole bunch of Aussies my age and older who are getting around this country with this understanding that he discovered it. And if they really believe that, then they also believe, because of the word discovered, there was nothing here before it. Now, if you are as Australian as I am, I need you to understand something. You are a 65,000-year-old Australian. But there's all these Aussies who run around and they think they're 254-year-old Australians. And so what that does, that perception alters the way that they encounter this country. It alters the way they see this country. It alters the way that they treat this country. If you are as Australian as I am, you're a 65,000-year-old Australian. So every time you see some Aboriginal culture, that's your culture. Every time you hear story, that's your story. Not in the same way it's mine, because think of it this way, we're all part of the same family, right? Now, as a kid, I used to get very jealous of the Greek kids at school because my family, if I'm honest, was quite dysfunctional. The Greek kids, they had these beautiful families and they'd come back from the Easter holidays and you'd hear these stories of Greek Easter. And I was so jealous. They'd have the big spit and they'd have the popu and the yaya, that's grandma and grandpa. And I imagined this beautiful, loving environment. And think of it like a Christmas tree. You talked about Christmas in July, but you think of it as a Christmas tree, right? So the family is the tree. The grandparents are the angel on top. They have all the rights and responsibilities in that family structure. And depending on who you are and your background, you have different rights and responsibilities on that tree, but you're all part of the same family. Does that make sense? Our Aboriginal elders, they're at the top of that tree. They have all the rights and responsibilities. And depending on who you are and where you're from, you have different rights and responsibilities within that structure, but we are all in the family. Am I making sense? You have all been adopted into this beautiful history, this tapestry that we call Australia. You know, as a kid, I used to get so frustrated because I'd meet people and they go, Scott, I spent some time in a Northern Territory community and they adopted me in and gave me a skin name. And I'd be like, oh, really? How many years did you live up there? Oh, no, I was there for 2 weeks. Shut up. Now, at this age, I realise, you know what? That is such a beautiful representation of this country because our people have always been of that nature. You're all part of our family. We're all together. So every single person in this room, as you walk out of here today, you need to understand that you're a 65,000-year-old Australian. And so all of this story is yours. Does this make sense? It's important that this makes sense for what I'm about to say next. Are you with me? Yeah. Does this all make sense? Yeah. Yes? Okay. Last year we had a referendum. And in the lead up to that referendum, I got to tell you, it was so distressing because the Conservative Church bankrolled the no vote. Now, in part they bankrolled it. For me, it was a no-brainer. Like, are you aware that right now in Australia, Aboriginal men are dying 9 years younger than every other demographic? My life expectancy is 9 years less yours. And we are dying from preventable disease. We are dying from suicide. If you go to the Northern Territory, where I spent time last year, it's a 20-year disparity. Are you aware that at the moment in Australia, 65 to 70% of all Australian adults have finished Year 12? So if you're walking down the main drag here, you see 10 adults, 7 have their Year 12 sorted. On average, 5% of Indigenous adults have finished Year 12. 70%, 5... Would you agree that's a massive difference? You don't finish school, you can't go to university. If you don't go to uni, you can't be a teacher, an engineer, a doctor, an accountant. And then that leads into role models. Think about this. When was the last time you had your taxes done by an Aboriginal person? When was the last time you had a teacher who was Aboriginal? When was the last time you saw a doctor who was Aboriginal? We've got a whole generation of Aboriginal children in this country today growing up, and I promise you, they can't articulate it in words, but what their spirit knows to be true is, if I don't play AFL footy, I've got no future, because the only role model they've ever seen escape a generation's deep poverty cycle is footballers. Now, one of the things I do as part of my job that I hate, I love it, but I hate it, I spend time in prisons. Now, if you follow my social media, you'll see last November, I was in 17 jails around the country. I go in and play music and just hang out with kids and adults. And I said, kids, do you know that we've got 10-year-old children in prisons in this country right now? Kids as young as 10. And just so you've got an understanding, it's not some cushy prison farm. You get there, there's metal detectors, you're strip searched, patted down, everything goes in a locker. You don't even take your belt in. You finish that, you get in there, the kids are in a 3x4 cell. There's a toilet and a bed. The sheet is stitched onto the mattress. There's no toilet seat. That's so they can't hang themselves. There's a perspex window on the cell door. If you're sitting on the toilet, you are getting looked at. Boys and girls as young as 10. They're let out of their cells for breakfast. They have school on site. They finish school. They have 1 hour of outside activity time, kicking a footy, playing basketball, laying under a tree. They have dinner at 4:30 p.m, these kids, and they finish dinner, they have a shower, put their pyjamas on, and then they're locked up at 7 p.m. It is brutal. I laugh my head off when I rock up to a private school and the kids there reckon they're real tough because they wear their hats backwards on free dress day. It's funny, when I first got asked to go to a jail, it was back in 2004 in Perth. a place called Banksia Hill. I played somewhere, and the fellow who was there, he said, listen, I work in this jail. Would you like to come in? I said, oh, yeah, why? He goes, because most of the kids in there are Indigenous. I said, really? He goes, yeah. I got in there, and pretty much every kid in that jail was Indigenous. And that's been the case for the last 20 years. The most recent juvenile prison I played at was in Queensland. It was a place called Cleveland Youth Detention Centre. There was 101 kids there in November. This is 6 months ago, November. End of November. There was 101 kids in the jail. 100 of those 101 were Indigenous. We make up 3% of the population. Let that sink in. I said to the principal, why is there so many black fellas in jail? She said to me, well, Scotty, there's a lot of reasons. One of it is role models. What broke my heart, there's this one boy, he's been there every year. I've been there for 5 years in a row. I didn't go once during the pandemic, but I've been to this jail every year. And he's been there every time I've been there. He's a songwriter. We've kind of bonded. And I'll be honest, when you hang out with these kids, they're good kids. They're better than a lot of the snotty-nosed private schools kids I encounter. Anyway, he's a good kid. And he saw me, he didn't know I was coming. And I walked into the classroom. And he got so excited. He looked at me and he goes, Scotty, how you going? Oh yeah, good mate, how are you? I'm deadly, that's what he said. I'm real deadly, that means I'm very excited. I said, why are you so excited? Are they finally releasing you after 5 years in jail? He goes, nah, soon I turn 18 and then I can go to the adult prison where my uncles are. And that's his pathway that he thinks is normal. A lot of the kids, if they're Indigenous, will get remanded for 6 months for stealing food because they're hungry. I read a story last night. There's a girl who has had a court date set in Kalgoorlie, West Australia, a court date set for stealing sanitary products as a woman. So there's real problems with just the justice system. But a lot of the kids also will deliberately reoffend to go back to prison on purpose because their home life is not good. Do you guys know what, I'm sure you do, but you know what generational trauma is? Yeah. There's a lot of kids who come from communities where there's domestic violence, there's sexual abuse, there's things going on, and they'll get caught breaking into a car so that they can get a feed. They'll get caught breaking into a house so they don't get attacked for the next 6 months. You know, if I get one more well-meaning person come up to me and go, Scott, the worst thing we ever did for your people was give them alcohol because they can't handle it, it's a genetic thing, I will dead set spew up. I shared last night the story of my father. I love my dad dearly, but he passed away 20 years ago. He was 57, and he'd started as a school teacher, but then he went back to uni and he studied social work. He did his Masters of Social Work. He started a doctorate. He was halfway through a doctorate. He had a breakdown in his 40s. So it turns out he'd been abused as a kid and he never dealt with it, and it broke him. Just, you know, that's what happens to us as people. I liken it to this. I shattered my tibial plateau very badly playing football. Had 3 surgeries. I need a knee replacement now, but I'm too young. They won't do it just yet, so I'm limping. If you see me limping, that's why. Now, even though my knee is a complete mess now, if I hadn't had those initial surgeries 20 years ago when I broke it, I might have been able to walk for a few months, but I would have been crawling after a few months because that knee is wrecked. And it's a bit like that with our spirits. When people hurt us, when people damage us, if we don't deal with it properly, you end up collapsing and crawling, and that's what happened to my dad. So even though he had an IQ that tested at Mensa levels, even though he had run a rehab centre, he ran an alcoholic refuge for the Salvation Army, he died of alcoholism at the age of 57. He wasn't Aboriginal. It's not race or religion or gender that makes people break, it is trauma, and we are 7 generations deep in it. So we've got kids who come from communities where there's so much damage that they deliberately go to jail so they can be safe. I took December and January off. I'm going to be honest with you guys. January I was not in a good space. And if I'm really honest, I'm still kind of climbing out of it. That broke me. That last day. There's 2 things that happened on the day that broke me. Now, I've been going to jail for a long time. This is the first time I've ever seen this. We finished a class, and at the end of the period, the bell goes. And this one boy walked up to the guard like this, and he was 12. And they handcuffed his wrists and they handcuffed his ankles, and they hog-tied marched him to his next class. And I said, why is that little fella shackled? Is he dangerous? They said, no, he runs. He runs. And I said, where's he going to run to? There's 20-metre razor wire. Where's he going to run to? Oh, we don't want to chase him. I don't know what it was about seeing that image of that little Aboriginal boy shackled, but it broke me. And then later, there was 2 10-year-old boys in the front row of a class that I taught. And they were so young and innocent. And I looked at them and I thought, yeah, they're at an age where they should have their whole life in front of them. They should have every hope and dream available to them. But they're finished. Their story's been written. They won't ever recover from this. And it broke me because here's the thing, they're all our family. Last year when we saw the referendum approaching, did you notice how much media there was talking about Aboriginal crime in Alice Springs? Did you notice that? Did you read that in the papers? Have you noticed you haven't read any of those stories since then, mind you? I was in Alice Springs last year, it's not that bad. There was so much division being caused, and all we wanted as Aboriginal people was to be able to go, hey, you know what, this is what's affecting our communities directly. Would you please let us have a bit of input into what you're doing, rather than governments who throw a 3-year, they're elected for 3 years and they'll throw a program at it for 1.5 years to get votes, and then the next mob come in and they change it again and again and again and again. I've given up waiting on governments to change things for my people. That's why I do what I do every single day, because I'm hoping that I can educate young people so my son won't be having the same conversations that I'm having with you today. But it's looking like he might. Now, if I'm really honest, I reckon God's people are the ones who've got the biggest responsibility on their shoulders. I've got some stuff for sale today. I've got some CDs and some vinyls. I've even got some boomerangs. These boomerangs, these are $20 each or 2 for $40. That's a special offer that I sell. Don't laugh. I told that joke in Launceston and everyone thought it was a good deal. I'll give this one away if you can answer this question. But you've got to answer it in its complete entirety. See, there's this one bit in the Bible where Jesus is hanging out with his best mates. 12 of them. Actually, 11. One wasn't that good. And they ask him what they think is a trick question. And to me, the entire New Testament is summed up in this passage. The entire Bible is summed up in this passage. The meaning of life is summed up in this passage. They say, hey, teacher, the Pharisees come up and they're trying to get him arrested, trying to get him killed for blasphemy. And they say, hey, teacher, what's the most important commandment in the entire Bible? Anyone know what he said? What did he say?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbour as yourself.
That's half. Give me the other half. I can. I'll break it in half. Then what you've won so far is a stick. No, incorrect. He's done well. Give him a clap. He's got half of it. He's clearly only read the message. No, I'm kidding. No, you've done well. Think about it. Does anyone know the second half? No. I love, by the way, sorry, tell me your name again. I love, Ryan, that there's a sentence in there that you got that a lot of the time as Christians, when we quote this scripture, we forget. Jesus starts out with the love of the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That sentence, the second is like it. Think about it, right? He's saying to us, what I'm about to say to you is as important as loving God. That's a massive, massive thing, right? Love your neighbour as you love yourself. Have you ever noticed when you read the scriptures that Jesus, he'll often make a point, but then he'll sort of circle back around and make that point a second time? Have you ever noticed how he does that? Because he knows that people are dumb? Because he made a lot of them? He knows there's some dumb people out there. That's all right. They're happy. We're happy, I should say. He then hammers the point home. He says, all the other words of all the other prophets and all the other commandments hang on this. I'm going to give you the entire New Testament in one sentence. I'm going to give you the whole scripture. I'm going to give you the new covenant. Here it is. Love God and love your neighbours as much as you love God. Have you ever thought about how hard it is to love your neighbour as you love yourself? It's tricky. The other day, this fella cut me off in traffic and all I wanted to do was wave at him with one finger. My daughter was in the car, so I didn't do it. About 5 minutes later, I cut someone off because the lane was ending, and my first thought was, gosh, I hope they don't wave at me with one finger. Have you ever noticed how we want grace and mercy for ourselves, but we want justice for everyone else? It's crazy, right? For me, as an Aboriginal man living in this country, I read the papers last year and I saw the media, and honestly, I've got to tell you, some of the comments online were disgraceful. When I had a song called Deadly Heart that got released, and that got played quite a bit on commercial radio on Triple M. You should have seen the stuff on my social media every single day. I was spending 10 to 15, 20 minutes a day deleting stuff off my social media, just racist filth. The papers would write a story about Alice Springs and there would be comment after comment after comment of just hate-filled vitriol towards Indigenous people. And my thought was, Imagine if everybody in Australia understood that we are all part of this one family, that we are all 65,000-year-old Australians, that we are all together, and we all have different places in that family, but we're all together, we're one family. And imagine if we had to start to see all these comments that said, instead of all this hate-filled stuff, if we started to see comments that said things like, how sad that that's happening to my family. How sad that this is what's going on in our country. I wonder what's caused it. Nobody would choose to live this way. What can I do to bring healing and restoration to my family? I come back to that scripture. Imagine if everybody in Australia decided to actually live that one commandment. Imagine if everybody who attends a church, even sporadically in Australia, made that their mantra. Every day I'm going to love my neighbour as I love myself. I'd probably be out of a job because my people would be flying. So what I want to do today, because we're not going to go forever, I know you'll be thrilled with that. I'm going to finish now, but before I do, I'm going to leave you with one word. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've got this one word that I reckon if we use it every day, it's a practical way that you can live out that one commandment, the great commandment. Just got to remember this word, use it every day. So I'll make you a promise too. I'll promise you that if you use this word every day, not only will you help change Australia, you'll bring healing to my people, you'll bring healing to our family, you will be happier, less stressed, and less anxious. Is there anyone here who would like to be less stressed? Anyone like to be less anxious? Want to be happier? All right, get excited. This is going to be good. Are you excited? Yep. You should be. Get excited. You ready? All right, come on. Here's the word. Flute. Can you say it with me? Flute. Don't laugh, you. You're a pastor. You should be all over this like a fat kid on a cupcake. Come on, flute. Get excited, flute. Now, flute's an acronym, stands for 5 words. But you remember it by saying flute. Get it tattooed on your knuckles if you need to. F stands for forgiveness. I mean, we can read the Bible all day long. Forgiveness is right throughout it. But let's talk about it practically as people. Has anyone in this room ever had someone who's hurt you very badly? Anyone ever been hurt so badly by another human, not even a week later, or I mean years later, you remember what they did to you, and you get the knot in your stomach and you're like, if I see that person in the street, I might speed my Kingswood up. Be honest, who's held a grudge? Who's held a grudge like that? Be honest. Put your hand up, Stephen Baxter, you are not Jesus. Is it fair to say we've all held a grudge? It's not a good feeling, is it? It's gross. It's funny, can I tell you, when I'm in schools, right, I talk about this stuff in schools, I talk about this stuff, you'd be amazed, I talk about it in corporate audiences, people on 7-figure salaries, and it still resonates. I talk about it to teenagers, and I'll often say to teenagers, has anyone ever met an old person who's miserable and bitter? And there's always one kid who goes, yes, my grandma, or grandpa. Now, I tell them this story. When I was 14, my daddy wanted me to work. I always had jobs. We always worked. And when I was 14, Dad came to me and he said, listen, he was a social worker running a retirement village at this point. He says, I've got you and your best mate Danielle a job. I said, oh yeah, cool. What is it? He goes, you're working in the nursing home. And our job was to spoon feed people dying their blended dinner. And it was full on. We did it for 2 years. We did it 7 nights a fortnight. I learned so much about life. You get close to people and they would die. It was hectic. Now, I never really had, I knew my grandfather a little bit growing up, but he was a missionary and we were living in Hong Kong, so I knew of him, I think, more than I knew him, if that makes sense. Never really spent time around old people as a kid. And I had this misguided idea that elderly people were amazing and wonderful and wisdom-filled and kind, and I thought this job's going to be the best. I've got to tell you, some of those old people were terrible. Some of them were so mean, and I learned really quickly every single elderly person who was miserable and bitter and mean had something in common with every other nasty, mean old person. You know what it was? None of them forgave. They'd tell you about people who hurt them 50 years ago. You'd sit and talk to them. And what I've been taught from my Aboriginal elders is this. When we were born, God created a bundle, same thing. God put inside every single person this spot right here. We call it your fire spot. Every single person. You've all got it. It's a spot to carry around hope, excitement, joy, good things. Have you ever had really good news? You felt like you're on fire in that spot? Here's the problem. When you don't forgive someone, you put a bit of cancer in that spot. Speaking metaphorically, sometimes even literally. You get a bit older, somebody else hurts you and you get a bit more cancer. And before you know it, you are miserable and broken down. I don't want to be that way. God doesn't want you to be that way. When Jesus says, how can you expect your Father in heaven to forgive you if you won't forgive your brother here on earth? He's not doing it because he's being an ogre. He's doing it because he knows that if you start forgiving, you're going to be happier. If you've got people in your life that have hurt you and you can't seem to forgive them, Go talk to a counsellor. The best thing, I'll tell you the truth, 5 years ago, I spent 8 months sitting with a psychologist figuring out how to forgive my dad for stuff that had happened 20 years ago. And he's been dead for 20 years. I didn't do it for him, did it for me, and I did it for my kids. If you're sitting there today, Scott, I wish I was happier. I promise you, start forgiving. Greatest thing you can do. As a nation, we have got to forgive each other. As people, we've got to forgive each other. F is for forgiveness, is massive. L, what do you reckon L stands for? There's a lot of kinds of love we could talk about. My daughter, who some of you met last night, she just rolls her eyes at me because any of those TV shows like Married at First Sight or Farmer Wants a Wife, I'm all over them. I love them. More as a people watching exercise, you know. She thinks I'm crazy. I won't talk about those. Let's talk about a different kind of love. Has anyone here recently practiced a random act of kindness, done something kind for somebody for no reason at all? Anyone done it? How good does it make you feel? The other day I was in Melbourne, I was getting on a tram and there was a young mum, she's about 20, she had a pram, she was struggling. And I said to her, do you need me to help you? It was raining. I said, I can lift that pram onto the tram if you like, because I can do push-ups, I could do 9 of them. And she said yes. So I lifted the tram on, hang on. Murdered the baby. I lifted the pram onto the tram. Anyway, we get on the tram, she starts to thank me. But as she thanked me, she starts crying. Thank you so much, I've had the worst day ever, my husband, blah, blah. Next 9 minutes, this is me on the number 58. Best bloke in Australia. How good's it make it? And if you're the person who has the kind thing done for you, incredible. I mentioned last night, Shane Howard, at that point in my career, no one knew who I was. I didn't have a record deal, I didn't get played on the radio. And I go to this famous icon of Australian music, would you sing your hit song on my record? Not thinking for a minute, he'd say yes. And he goes, you know what, Scotty, I'm going to do an act of kindness and change my life forever. Change the life of my family. Just from one act. And we can be that in the people around us every day's lives. It is cool to be kind. That's what I say to the kids, it's cool to be kind. F is for forgiveness, L is for love, showing acts of kindness. U is for understanding. How many times do you just judge a person without really knowing the full story? Come to your conclusions. Do you know, there's always a reason for everything that happens on this planet. I think that's the thing that really frustrates me when it comes to our history and to the plight of Indigenous people in this country right now is nobody would choose for things to be rolled out the way they are right now. We are in the position we're in because of 250 years of compounded combined history. And if you can't acknowledge that, then you're not being genuine. If we can actually stop on a daily basis in the relationships around us and look for what has caused situations, look for reasons. Education leads to understanding, understanding leads to empathy, empathy brings change. What it does, it makes forgiving and loving a whole lot easier. You know, I think about Jesus with the woman at the well. And he goes to this woman and he says to her, you know what? I love you and you're forgiven. Because he knows her story, he knows her plight, he knows her background. He doesn't just stand there and come to a conclusion. He's got the reasons. And as people who call ourselves followers of Jesus, we have a responsibility to look for the reasons because it allows us to love and forgive more. Forgiveness, love, understanding. T is for tolerance. Now, there's a lot of Christians who roll their eyes at the word tolerance, but I've got to tell you, when you tolerate a person or a situation, what you're really doing is you're making a decision, whether you realise it or not, you're making a decision to forgive someone immediately. You're not letting what they did live in your fire spot. It's like you pour water on a grass fire instead of petrol. I often wonder how many marriages in Hobart would be better if both people had a bit more tolerance in them. How many staff rooms full of teachers would work more cohesively? How many football teams could play better? Tolerance is massive, and I want to encourage you to be people who show more tolerance. Forgiveness, love, understanding, tolerance. E is for empathy. It's probably my favourite one. Now, the dictionary defines empathy as being able to use the power of your mind, your imagination to feel and experience what someone else is going through. It's not a thinking thing, it's a feeling thing. Now, a couple of years ago, I had a school that came to me, they said, Scott, every year our school music program goes on tour somewhere around the world. They go and do concerts. It's a very expensive school, and they might go to Italy or they might go to Spain and they do concerts, and they take a guest artist and the school kids will learn that artist's songs and they play them publicly, you know. And they said, we want you to be our guest artist. This is 18 months ago. I said, oh yeah, where are we going? They said, we're going to go to Uluru for 12 days. Now, Uluru, in my opinion, is the most incredible place in the world. So we rolled into Uluru. They asked me to do this thing. Now, initially I was like, yeah, that'd be amazing. But then I thought about it. I was like, coming out of the pandemic, I hadn't worked much. I said to them, listen, I don't know if you can afford me for 12 days, right? Because I'm going to have to bill you. They told me what their budget was. I got on the bus and we started driving and we had 12 days on the bus I downloaded a whole heap of Netflix. There was this one show, I don't know if anyone has seen it, it's called Shooter. A guy called Ryan Phillippe's in it. It's a really cool show. 3 seasons. I watched all 3 seasons in a day on the bus. There's this one bit in the final episode, and you're not expecting it, and it's very sad. And it happens. And I'm missing my kids and my family already. I'm on the bus, I am bawling. I'm howling, right? And these year 10 kids are coming up leaning over my seat. Are you all right, Scott Darlow? And I'm on the bus going, the air conditioning on this bus. But I thought about it afterwards and I thought, isn't it interesting? We can often be so impacted by a fictitious story on a screen, but often when it's real life people, we don't care as much. It's crazy, isn't it? Hey church, can you do me a favour? Just humour me. Let's pretend we're 9 years old. See if you can remember these words with me. F is for? Oi. Try again. You're not too cool for this. The coolest person in this room had his jacket hand-stitched in San Diego for Christmas. Let's try again. Let's go. F is for? L is for? U-T-E. When I first became properly in a relationship with Jesus Christ in my early 20s, see, I'd been playing footy, and I grew up in a Salvation Army home, and when my dad spiralled, every friend I ever had didn't want to know me. My first year of uni, I didn't have a friend in the world. It was a brutal time, and my response was to go, if this is what Jesus is, if this is what Christians are, I'm not interested at all. They can go and get stuffed. I'd been playing VFL footy for 5 years at a team called Coburg, and I had a falling out with a coach at the time, and I thought, well, I'll go up and play up home at Shepparton with my cousins. They had a team called Rumballara in the Goulburn Valley League, very strong league. And I rolled up there, and I got to be honest with you, I was a mess at that point. Dad was spiralling, and I was probably well on my way. I had as many problems as he did. And there was one non-Indigenous person on that team. He was the local high school chaplain. He was a champion centre-half forward, Dallas Turlich. And Dallas had made this point of going to go and play in this Aboriginal team. And him and this other fella, Dixie, they were both Christians. And before the first game, they grabbed me and they said, come here, we're going to pray with you. And I was too scared of them to say no. I just said, all right, you know. But what happened over the next 12 weeks was these boys, they loved me. They loved me in a way that I don't think I'd ever been loved in my life before. And after about 12 weeks, I had this epiphany that, you know, the way they're choosing to treat me, they're giving me a taste of the love that Jesus has for me by the way they are choosing to encounter me on a daily basis. I see Christians all over the world who are running around telling people how they should live, judging people, condemning people, so much hardness and hatred and superiority. And young people of the world, they see who Jesus is through the scriptures, and they see who that is, and there's a chasm. I fell in love with Jesus because I had a taste of his love through the way people chose to treat. It's a bit like this. When I first met my wife, I mentioned last night I met her. She was the older sister of one of my students at Gisborne High School, and I met her, and it was so funny. I knew straight away I loved her. I fell in love with her that day. We were married 17 months after we met. Now, after the first couple of weeks of dating, she looked at me this one day, and I'll never forget it. She looks at me, she goes, Scott, I really like you, but I'm not going to kiss you till you stop biting your nails, because that habit's disgusting. And I stopped biting my nails that day. But it wasn't because I didn't think she'd kiss me, because I knew she couldn't hold out. Please don't tell her I said that. I fell in love with her, and there's something about my character that I knew displeased her, and I just wanted to change it because I loved her. Our job as followers of Jesus is to give people a taste of the love that they have, that Jesus has for them by the way we choose to encounter them, and he'll get them to stop biting their nails. F.L.U.T.E is a practical way that you can live that commandment out. It's a practical way that we can get people to stop biting their nails. And can I just say this finally? How does this help Aboriginal people? Really simple. Have you guys learned even just a little bit about Indigenous people in Australia through hanging out with me this weekend? Have you ever noticed you might be unaware something exists, but then when you learn about it, you start to notice it everywhere? A couple of years ago, I had a song getting played on the radio quite a bit. It's called You Can't See Black in the Dark. And my wife found out I was getting a payment from my record label. You get paid quite well for that. She rings me up. She goes, are we getting this payment come through? I said, yep. She goes, I really like those Mitsubishi Outlanders. I said, what's that? Because at that stage, I was driving a 1974 Kingswood station wagon on Monaro rims. She goes, it's an SUV, 7-seater. After she pointed it out, what car do you reckon I start seeing at every set of traffic lights? Bloody Outlanders. Now I own one. But after today and in the future, you are going to see more social media posts, more news articles, more conversations around Indigenous issues. It's just going to come up more. And what I would love for you to do is unpack each story, each conversation, each thing you see, hear, read about with a flute lens, and use that to process it. And understand this: you are massive influencers. Every single person here, you are an influencer. I got a DM the other day, I got an Instagram message from a girl, she's 15, she goes, "Scott, you're never going to believe it, my dad's a massive racist." Now, I did believe it, she's from Queensland, but she reckons her dad said some real racist stuff over dinner, and this 15-year-old kid, she uses flute, she tells her dad about understanding and empathy, and now her dad's changed his mind about the date of Australia Day. And we can all be that in the lives of the people around us. But to do it effectively, you need to be educated yourselves, understanding your space in this family as a 65,000-year-old Australian. So there's a lot of stuff out there that's very easy for you to access. How many of you guys have seen a movie called The Last Daughter on Netflix? Did you cry? How many of you guys have seen a show on ABC iView called In My Blood It Runs? It's a series. Did you cry? It's amazing, isn't it? How many of you guys have seen Rabbit Proof Fence? Yeah. How many of you guys have seen the Adam Goodes documentary, The Final Quarter? Can I encourage you? And also, the fifth one is The Sapphires, which is a true story written about one of my cousins about our aunties. Right? Please educate yourselves on our country as a 65,000-year-old country that you have a place in, and understand that our job, if you're going to be a fair income follower of Jesus, your job is to live that commandment. And if you're not prepared to do it, if you're not prepared to love your neighbour as you love yourself, then you're probably not being fair income, if I can be that blunt. I want to thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing my heart, letting me share my heart, I should say. And I really appreciate you having me this weekend, mate. God bless you guys.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for sharing your heart and for helping us grow in our understanding. Appreciate that, Matt. Right? And also, that you come with a heart, as best as you can, a flute as well.
Yeah.
The forgiveness
Oh,
of
mate,
love.
I don't always get it right, especially when Jetstar do their thing.
I know. For those who weren't here, Jetstar meant that Scott was meant to fly in yesterday morning, but flew in an hour and a quarter before he was meant to start.
A young fella told me that he tracked my flight and we landed at 5:47. I got told I landed.
4:47, I think, wasn't it? 4:47.
Was it 5?
Yeah, but anyhow, pretty close anyhow. Anyhow, I'm going to pray for Scott. Would you join me as we pray? Father, I want to thank you for Scott. Thank you for what he brings to Australia. That he knows your forgiveness, that he exercises forgiveness, and that he's able to go into so many places across Australia that none of us could ever go, and talk about your love, and talk about a way ahead amidst the brokenness and the pain of our country and of our Indigenous people. Would you continue to use him for the ongoing work of your kingdom? And I pray for each of us in this room that you would enable us to continue a journey of understanding, of empathy, of love and forgiveness and understanding as we take this journey together and with you, that we might see your kingdom come, your will be done on earth in this place. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, mate. Let's give you another hand, please.